Alright gang, we have our video here for the last section, section 4 of chapter 13, and we've been going through meiosis, and now we are going to look at some of the strengths of meiosis, genetic variation. If we compare it to mitosis, if we were to make a new generation of organisms through mitosis, they would be clones of the parents, and there's no genetic variation, which can cause some problems. But anyway, fortunately we do meiosis followed by fertilization or sexual reproduction, and so we get some variation. So we're going to go through 3 different ways that variation shows up. Pretty straightforward. I'm just, again, copying the diagrams from the book like always, and if you read this, it's just going to be stuff that was in the reading, but sometimes it's better to hear it than to read it. So anyway, first thing is independent assortment, and when it's talking about independent assortment here, we are looking at, so independent assortment, we're looking at the homologs as they line up in metaphase. So this would be meiosis 1, metaphase of meiosis 1. The homologs are lined up, and the independent assortment idea is that if I'm looking at the chromosomes, and we have these colored differently, for this individual you got half of your chromosomes from your mom and half from your dad. So this is saying the red ones are maternal, the chromosomes from the mom of this individual, and the blue ones are paternal, the ones from the dad. And oftentimes if you guys were drawing these, you would oftentimes just put the red ones on one side and the blue on the other side, because it just makes sense to group them according to color. But it doesn't, they're not actually colored inside of your cells, they look all the same. And there's no like grouping according to all of dad's genes on one side and mom's genes on the other. I reversed that. But in reality it's completely random which one lines up on the left and which one lines up on the right, and these chromosomes behave independent of these chromosomes. So the way they assort during meiosis is independently. So that would mean that for these 2 chromosomes, they could line up this way with the paternal on one side and maternal on the other, or they could line up this way where we've got a mixture. So we got big chromosome from dad and a small one from mom and big from... Anyway, if we kind of push forward with this, go through meiosis 1. When meiosis 1 is done, that rhymed, here we've got the beginnings of our haploid cells that look different, and we've got different types of chromosomes there. If I go all the way and finish out meiosis here, anyway, you can see that we've got different types of gametes being made. We've got this with paternal chromosomes, these with just maternal, these have the big paternal and the small maternal, and so on. So we got these different combinations. In class today, somebody asked, this is a great question. In class today, somebody asked, they said, what does it matter? Because if they're homologous chromosomes, aren't they the same anyway? And I was like, oh, that's such a great question because it's such a common misconception. And the common misconception is that if they're homologs, they must carry the same genes. So here's the deal with homologs. They are called homologs because, they look the same. So this one looks the same as this one. They're homologs. And they have the same types of genes, meaning maybe this one has the genes for, I don't know, I have a lump on my nose. If I go sideways here, there's just a little bit of a bump on my nose. So we'll just say this is for the bump on the nose. That comes through my mom's side of the family. Bump, not bump. Bump on the nose. Excuse me, my dad's family does not have the bump on the nose, so we're going to say no bump, excuse me. Alright, and so that's for the bump on the nose, and they're homologous because they're carrying the nose bump gene, but they can have different types of that gene, and that's the big thing, so they're not exactly the same. So when I get down here, this one has no bump in its genes, this one has the bump. Okay. If we look at the other chromosome, let's just say that this has to do with whether or not you have hair on this knuckle. Your pointer finger, that's my pointer finger, there we go. If you have hair on that knuckle, that's actually a genetic trait. It's really weird, but that's a genetic trait. I don't have hair on that knuckle, if you wondered. But anyway, so let's just say that this one is no hair, and this one is hair on that knuckle of your pointer finger. Right now, hopefully all of you are looking at your pointer finger to not just to see. Anyway, go check with your parents, see if you have the same as them, and you could try to figure some stuff out here. But so again, if we're looking at combinations, we've got no bump with no hair here. We have bump with hair here. But then I get over here, and this is what's exciting. We've got no bump mixed with hair. There we are, no bump mixed with hair. And over here we have bump mixed with no hair. It's a new combination just because of this independent assortment. So that's the idea of independent assortment. We put some numbers to this, okay, and the book went through this, and if you grasped the numbers, it was pretty exciting. Pretty exciting stuff. But the numbers on this, if you want to statistically figure out, like in that situation there was 4 possible gametes that could come, statistically the way you figure this out is if you looked at each homologue, there was 2 different ways that the homologue could line up, okay? Anytime that you're doing a series of events that have 2 different options, your statistical formula here is two options and 2 to the nth, where n is how many different, in this case homologues it is, but how many different events. So in the case of the cell we were just looking at, it was 2 to the second because there was 2 pairs of homologues in there. That gave us our 4 options. If we throw that into humans, again, 2 options for each pair of homologues, we've got 23 pairs of homologues, okay? So that means we've got 2 to the 23rd, which the book rounds this to 8 million, but it's actually 8,388,608. What that means is for you, if you're a guy, that means you could make 8,388,608 different types of sperm just based on the idea of the chromosomes lining up independently of each other. If you're a female, you can make that many different types of eggs, okay? That's a lot of differences there. All right. Now, if we throw in random fertilization, what random fertilization means is that there's no rhyme or reason as to which sperm ends up fertilizing the egg or which egg gets released to get fertilized. That's the random fertilization. So if we take 2 random chance events and see what the chances of them both happening, okay, so the chances of the sperm that made you was a 1 out of 8,388,608. Okay, 1 out of that. The chances of you being the egg that got fertilized is 1 out of this many. Okay, if I want to figure out what the chances of this and this happening again being, I take this and multiply it twice. So I square this basically. Okay, that times itself, and that hits us up at our 70.3 trillion. Actually, it rounds up to 70.4 trillion different possibilities of egg and sperm. So there you have it. You are a 1 in 70 trillion shot of the sperm and the egg that made you coming together. The book says you're pretty unique. I say, wow, yeah, you're pretty special. Don't you feel special? So now we're going to go on. This is before we look at some other type. This is basic. We're going to add some more variation to it, and you'll find out that 1 in 70 trillion, you're way more unique than that. So we'll take a look at that here. All right, now if we look at crossing over as far as a source of genetic variation, this is chromosomes that we've got 3 different genes highlighted on these chromosomes, like little a's and little c's and big A's and big B's, but we're just going to ignore the A's and B's and whatever, and we're going to attach an actual trait to them. So let's do this. Let's say that red hair and freckles go together and they happen to be on the same chromosome. So let's just say on the blue chromosome here that this letter A represents red hair and the letter C freckles. Okay, and then let's say on the red chromosome, the lowercase letter A here, that's going to be brown hair, so it would be for brown hair, and the little case C, this little c here, we're going to say is a N for normal, meaning not freckles. Now, if you have freckles, I didn't say you're not normal, okay, but we're just going to do it this way. Don't be offended. I'm sorry. Just don't be offended. Anyway, so if we go through the red hair and freckles, sorry, my finger going through here, the red hair and the freckles, they're linked on the same chromosome, so if this indeed were how it is, they're on the same chromosome, that would mean anyone who had red hair would also have freckles. They're on the same chromosome, they can't get away from each other unless crossing over happens. So this crossing over, which you guys know about, you read about it a little bit earlier, what we're seeing is an exchanging of DNA on homologues. Okay, they're wrapped around each other. We're going to cut the one off, cut the other, and kind of rearrange them. And all of a sudden, I get a chromatid right here. Do it a highlighter. Right here, we get this chromatid. This is shocking. This would have been, if this actually happened, this would have been in the population the first possibility of having somebody with red hair, and this little c is no freckles. Wow. Red hair, no freckles. It would have been total like, wow, where did this come from? We didn't know it was possible. It actually wasn't possible until the crossing over happened. Then we would have somebody with brown hair, and oh my goodness, they have freckles. This is crazy stuff right now, okay? Human traits, I don't know that they know a whole lot on human traits, but I've often thought, like, it used to be that blonde hair and blue eyes really went together. And there's also a lot of people with brown hair and blue eyes, and I've often wondered if blonde hair and blue eyes were linked at one point, and then like a crossing over unlinked them. But if we look at our genetic variation here, we've got, as this goes through meiosis, one of the gametes is going to get this, the all blue chromatids. One of the gametes is going to get this, the all red, and those were normal. Those were things that actually did exist in the previous generation. But there's a new variation here. Okay, now we get ones that are having some of the paternal genes mixed with some of the maternal, and this one has some of the maternal mixed with some of the paternal. You can see how it adds to the genetic diversity. If you throw that into your 70 trillion, like you're a 1 in 70 trillion shot, it becomes astronomical. Like, we can't estimate what's the number of different possibilities of gametes could be made, because we don't know when this happens, this crossing over, and it can happen more than once or not more than once. It's totally not predictable. So basically, you are one in a, God must have chosen you. We'll say that. We'll say that. But there's, yeah, it's a very large number. Anyway, so that's the crossing over part. Now, the next thing we have to go into is where does this fit in with, because this is actually a huge driving force for evolution when we go through evolutionary theory, and that is a highly important part when you're studying for the AP exam coming up, is pretty much take everything and figure out how it supports or is supported by or whatever evolution. Okay, so if we look at this one, we have not talked a lot about evolution yet, and I'm going to switch to the next slide here. All right. We haven't, like I said, we haven't talked a whole lot about evolution, and so one thing that we have not talked about is the idea of natural selection or survival of the fittest. We're just going to use natural selection here. Hopefully you have natural selection. I got to figure out how to write better on this program. I also have to figure out how to spell. There we go. Natural selection. Blah. Anyway, natural selection, and the idea with natural selection is if you take a genetically diverse group of organisms and put them into a new environment, or if you change the environment that they're in, there is going to be some organisms will have a trait that makes them better suited to the environment, and if that's the case, they will pass their genes on. Okay, so let's just say, this is really a stretch, but let's just say these dots are some kind of a bug. Okay, and that birds like to eat these bugs. Okay, a certain type of bird likes to eat these bugs, and so here those birds are existing, and they've got genetic diversity. Okay, because of the the meiosis and the independent assortment and the random all that crossing over. So we have different colors of these insects. Okay. And they're all able to live. They all live equally. Nobody has a competitive advantage over anybody else. It's no big deal. Okay. Well, if we were to introduce, let's say, a new predator to this area, so some predator, a bird that likes to eat insects, and that bird happens to be colorblind, it can see every color except for red. All of a sudden, there is a competitive advantage to the insects that are red because they can't be seen by their predator. All right. So in this case, before selection, before this new bird was introduced to the area, all of these things could live equally, no big deal, but they did have variety because of mutations and whatever. Well, if I'm a bird and I can see these insects other than the red ones, I'm going to eat this one, and so this one's going to die, and it won't be able to pass on its genetic information, and I'll eat this one, and it won't be able to pass on its, and I'll eat this one, and it won't be able to pass on its information. So then I have these, this one, and this one, and this one, and this one. I have these passing on their genetic information, and so after these birds have been around for a little while, this is the only genetic information that's going to remain. Okay, and so we actually had a change. This is microevolution is what I'm showing. We can see this happening. We have a change in the community. Okay, that population will grow, and any time that one of these other traits that would be less advantageous shows up, they're going to be picked off by the birds. Okay, so finally we're going to end up with a population that is different than the original. Okay, and this time it was just based on color. All right, but we have had a change in the features of a change in the features of a group of organisms. Okay, so that's the natural selection idea. That's how genetic variation works in there. And I think that's it. So you have a good evening.